Hi everyone, welcome back to Storytime Recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the film from 2021, The Ghosts of Borley Rectory. Without any further, let's get started. In May 1937, Lionel and Marianne Foyster own a stunning bungalow in England called the Borley Rectory. Two men enter the house, one carrying a bag that appears to be very heavy. The first person is Harry Prince, a well-known paranormal investigator, who is joined by Mark Kerpers, his employee. Harry intends to remain in the property for nearly 6 months in order to perform a thorough research into the unexplained activities that have been reported at the famous Borley Rectory. Mark believes they will get the day off because they have just arrived, but Harry informs him that the research would start today. He is a little disappointed, but he complies, carries the luggage once more, and follows Harry. At night, when Harry's employee walks in the door and tells him that everything is prepared, Harry is pleased and satisfied with his choice over the other applicants. The employee is also pleased and says he is here to learn from Harry. He offers Harry tea, but he says he'd prefer some booze. Mark feels that because everything is set up, they will start the inquiry. However, he is taken aback when he sees Harry getting ready for bed and lying in his suit on his bed, because he feels that anything can happen and that it is best to be prepared for it. Although Mark is confused, he follows Harry's directions. He wants Mark to wake him up at 4:00 a.m. before going to bed and to go to the restroom and stay there for an hour before moving. Mark then exits the room holding his lantern. Mark starts examining the house, walks into a room, and sits down. As he takes out his notebook and pen, a strange noise comes from that room, startling him. He decides to leave the room without staying for a moment longer, and as he does so, he mentally apologizes to Harry. The following morning, 3 people arrive at the house. Sidney Glenville, the older guy, greets Harry. He is accompanied by his son Roger and daughter Helen. Harry greets everyone. Sidney claims that he had to walk half a mile because the taxi refused to let him into the property because it was cursed, and Harry agrees. While the guys go inside, Helen chooses to explore the property, but Harry advises that she just remain on the property grounds. As she passes greenery, a nun wearing a black veil keeps approaching. Helen is unaware of this and is amazed by her surroundings. She finds a chain on the ground and picks it up, discovering a cross on it. As she stares at the chain, a hand is placed on her shoulder, startling her and revealing Mark behind her. Mark apologizes. In contrast, Harry reveals that the majority of the incidents have been observed in the restroom. As they are speaking, Helen and Mark enter the room, leading Sidney to leave and come back later, while Helen and Roger remain to assist Harry and Mark. A group of people gather around the dining table. It includes Charles Sutton, Lionel Foyster, Basil Payne, Rev Henning, and Marianne. Harry welcomes them and says that the purpose of the meeting is to finally finish the investigation and provide the family all the information they need. When a man at the table explains that several investigators have visited the place, conducted investigations, and taken records, Charles asks Harry what the true purpose of the investigation is. Harry responds that he and Sidney have made the decision to record every second of the 6 months he will be staying in the house, that at least one of his members will always be awake, and that nothing will elude Harry and his team. Also, he wants to try out some new experiments, but Foyster doesn't want them to be commercial, so Harry agrees. He explains that only Charles will be permitted to enter the premises while the study is on because Harry believes in his judgment.
Fantastical, I assure you.
Lionel attempts to silence Marianne, who is adamant that there is a supernatural presence in the house, but Marianne gives him a warning: either she tells the truth or he will. When Lionel makes the decision to speak, he admits that he had seen odd things within the Borley Rectory that he had kept a secret from everyone. After listening to Rev Henning, he claims he would only tell Harry the entire story. Harry quickly stands up, but Marianne stops him.
However, reveals something to the...
She claims that all of her stories are true and that she has seen her many times on the property grounds. She also claims that she instills negative visions in everyone's minds, which has an impact on them. She also thinks that she detects Marianne as herself and that she would be grinning at the fact that she has had Harry for 6 months. Marianne turns to face Harry and says, "She here." Harry and Lionel meet in a room, and throughout their stay, Lionel has seen shadows of her in memory of events that occurred on the property. She chooses when to appear, and only Marianne has seen her frequently.
They're in a loop. They are
In 1925, Lionel was planting in his garden when he sensed someone was behind a tree. He approached it and saw a nun, who had a rope around her bust area and an injured face with blood dripping from her mouth and eyes. As he saw her, Lionel screamed and fled right away. It was the last time he had seen her until now. He saw her in the same room that Marianne did, and Harry is now adamant on learning the truth.
Yeah, everything.
That night, Estelle, Mike, Helen, and Harry gather around the table to begin a new experiment. Estelle, a spiritual medium, calls for the spirits in Borley Rectory. As she attempts to lure the spirit to join them, she notices a woman sobbing in a corner, directly behind Mark. Estelle discovers that the woman is named Marie, and Harry asks whether Marie is the only one in the house, and she declines.
Is she the only one here?
She heard you.
Estelle becomes agitated and wants to stop, but Harry pushes her to go on, since she feels uneasy by the powerful old energy surrounding Marie. Harry reluctantly consents to break the circle, but they are unable to do so. When they eventually break it and begin coughing, the nun approaches Estelle and insists that she keep everything private. Estelle is extremely disturbed. They have been in the mansion for a week, and everyone is disappointed except Harry because nothing has happened. Harry explains that the last time he was at Borley Rectory, he smelled burning in his room, which was like a night terror for him as a child. The terror stopped as soon as he left his house for university. His curiosity led him to learn that the house he lived in had once belonged to a woman in the 1700s. She was killed by fire in Harry's room, which is why he was so scared. He quickly realized his destiny and went into this field. The true reason he goes there is to learn why. On his last visit to Borley Rectory, he slept in a tiny room and experienced night terrors again years later. That night, when Mark is sleeping, Roger is awake and terrified, gazing at a chair across from him. While he is doing this, a red book falls, and he is about to touch it as a hand touches her. He retreats and lifts his blanket to his eye. One evening, when Basil complains about the church bells ringing and bright lights coming from the house, Harry calls Basil inside to film it because he thinks it is not part of the experiment, but Basil refuses and leaves. When Roger tells Helen and Mark what happened, Helen criticizes him for not recording it, and Mark looks through the red book. While he is on a lookout, Roger is approached by the nun, and she mysteriously adds worms to his sandwich. When he wakes up and eats a piece, he begins to throw up. In the morning, Harry chooses to send him back to London, since Roger is the weakest member of the group, and move the experiment to the next step. He placed the bells an inch above the floor. Mark and Helen are playing with Roger while he looks through the red book. When the bell rings, Mark rushes over there and sees Harry doing an experiment. That night, Helen looks around with her lantern, and as soon as she turns around, the nun stabs her. When she wakes up, she realizes it was only a nightmare, and she discovers Roger acting strangely while talking on the phone. She asks him if he's okay, and he responds in a deep voice. Then she lies down, and the nun is right next to her, staring at her intently. She wakes up again, terrified, and hears the bells ringing in the distance. She and Roger go in that direction, but as they bend down, they realize that it is very cold there. Roger wants to go right away, but as they are about to turn around, Helen begins to scream, and Roger crawls behind in terror. Harry and Mark rush in their direction. When they all get back together, Harry realizes the nun is there. Mark begs him not to, but Harry turns around and the lights go out. When they return, the nun is standing behind Mark. On the next day, Mark writes wildly. His work provides evidence of mass panic. Roger and Helen leave to London, and Helen thinks the rectory intended Harry and Mark to be alone, and it got what it wanted. The same day the bell rings again. Mark kneels to look and notices a pair of legs entering his line of vision. Thinking it is none other than the real Harry, he sighs with relief and tries to explain that he thought it was the nun. Harry yells at him and tells him not to think because the rectory will use it to take advantage of him. In order to spice up their final week, Harry tells Mark what the man needs to do. Mark listens intently and nods. Harry does not view witnesses as evidence since he thinks they may forget. He claims that taking notes and taking pictures is important because it aids in the matching process. While talking, they hear sounds. As soon as they realize it's coming from the blue room, they move in its direction. As soon as they walk in, they find the room chilly, and the books that are on the wall are also cold. Harry notices that the cold is permeating the walls, so he and Mark take everything off of the wall. The wall is also freezing, so Mark gets Harry some flour and begins tossing it on it. Harry claims that if the wall is wet, the flour will adhere to it. Mark tries it as well. The word Marianne appears on the wall. Mark tries to obtain a picture of it, but the word vanishes. When Sydney visits the Borley Rectory the next day, Harry tells him what happened that night because he thinks they are getting near to the truth. In Harry's opinion, the wall is like a door that allows them to communicate and solve the house's mystery. He also stated that he does not want the investigation to go beyond 6 months.
Yes, it has been hard.
In May 1938, a year after Harry first visited Borley Rectory, they all gather in the same room once more. When Basil refuses to meet Harry, Harry decides to end the research because the new person, Captain Gregson, does not think ghosts exist. Charles is confused and wants to know the mystery solution. Harry agrees to share his work, but only if it stays in the room. He begins his story at the beginning with the idea that the home was asleep and that hell was ready to erupt. In April 1938, Harry got up in the middle of the night, looked around and outside, and saw nothing unusual. He assumed Mark was asleep, but as he was about to leave, he found a dead body wrapped in a cloth on his once empty bed, along with a skull and a sword. When the body wakes up and turns around, Harry is in a nun costume with tears and blood pouring down his face. As he turns to go, the nun stabs him in the stomach. Harry wakes up and screams. Sydney calms him while Mark rushes into the room. Sydney asks Harry about the nightmare and Harry says that he just saw his death, which frightens him. Sydney thinks that whatever is in the house is speaking to Harry. That evening, Sydney, Helen, Marianne, Harry and Mark in a circle with a Ouija board in the middle. After asking that everyone hold hands, Helen begs everyone to keep their eyes open while she closes hers, stating that she will be the only one speaking. Helen starts the session by asking the spirit to knock once to indicate yes, and twice to indicate no. A knock then occurs. After a few questions, Mark asks if the spirit is stuck, and the spirit knocks once. Later, the table begins to shake. Marianne sees the nun beneath the tablecloth. Helen is attacked, and Harry thinks the building is haunted by ghosts, and they are all attacked. When they awaken, they see Helen possessed. The nun and Mark gaze at each other, and Harry realizes that the nun had meant to open the doorway and draw them all here. Other spirits want to leave, but the nun captures them, and in order to save Helen, Mark touches her, and then he faints. The nun then orders Marianne to shut up. The next morning, Mark was taken to the hospital by an inspector who couldn't believe that Mark was like that, because he fell.
Mighty odd.
After the incident, when Harry and Marianne talk, Harry notices a change in Marianne's voice and her strange behavior. The spirit, who calls himself the Everything, stabs Harry, waking him up knowing it was just a dream. Then he and Marianne leave.
Up soon.
6 months after he left, the Borley Rectory caught fire and the tenant died. No one knows how the fire began, and legends persisted. Harry feels he is the only one who has a chance to solve the mystery. Thanks for watching, and remember to turn on your notifications to watch more movie recaps like this one.